Burning Force on the Sega Genesis. A game that, judging by the visuals alone, one could think this is Namco's attempt to essentially try and copy the legendary Space Harrier. And to a certain degree you're right, but it's a little different in a few respects. Now, the story is, and yes, despite being an arcade game, this game does have a story, is about some girl trying to graduate school and become sort of like space fighter pilot or something. I actually don't have the manual, so I can't confirm that entirely, but near as I can tell, that's the plot. But because this is an arcade game, the biggest emphasis is, of course, on gameplay. And the gameplay, well, going back to the start of this video, does initially look like Space Harrier. There are a few differences. First of all, you are pretty much entirely stuck on the ground, which actually makes this closer to, say, something like 3D World Runner on the NES rather than Space Harrier, but essentially you can't just fly around and dodge all the enemies. Evasion of enemies has to be a lot more tactically done because you can't simply fly over everything or fly under everything. Instead, all you have is your horizontal movement. Now, that's not to say there isn't any sort of vertical movement. There are ramps located sporadically in between each area, and hitting each ramp will allow you to fly in the air for a brief amount of time. This can be useful for dodging enemies, but more often than not, it is used for picking up power-ups. Power-ups that could change the way your gun fires, or your missile type. At least, I think your missile type changes. That might be tied to lasers, I'm not actually sure. The missiles themselves seem a little bit weird in how they act in relativity to your weapon type. But other than that, it is a simple game of flying around on your hovering motorcycle, shooting the ever-living hell at everything that comes your way. And in that respect, it's a ton of fun, but wait, there's one last trick this game likes to throw at you, and that is the boss battles. Before the boss battle, you are taken aboard your, mothership, given a quick briefing on what boss you're fighting, and then your hover bike is turned into a plane. And now, you've got full vertical movement, which is important because you now have to fight bosses, which requires you to hit various specialized weak points as indicated by your mission briefing. And without this vertical movement, you wouldn't be able to do that. That said, the bosses themselves are somewhat unimpressive, especially given the number of different enemy types you see along the way. They just sort of feel like they could have had a lot more work put into them, or at least that's kind of how I felt about it. Now overall, the gameplay is relatively well paced. You can speed up and slow down, which is useful for evading enemies and bullets, but for the most part this is largely not utilized. You can more or less beat the entire game going the standard speed with relatively no issues whatsoever. But that said, if you're trying to fly through an area fast to get to the end so you can show various bits of footage on a YouTube video, well, it's a little bit useful to speed up. Overall though, there are some weird bits to the gameplay, such as the speed up and slow down and how the missiles work in relativity to your 3 or 4 different weapon types, but overall I think the gameplay to Burning Force works relatively well. The presentation to Burning Force is solid. The overall visuals are, well, not technically impressive by any means or measure. They're bright, they're colorful, and there's a fair different number of enemies to run into. I will complain that the environments do get a little bit samey because each environment is reused 3 or 4 times in each level, but at the same time they're all part of the same level, so I kind of understand that. I do wish there was a little bit more variance to the weapons, and honestly, with the exception of the spread shot, they all more or less feel the same. So yeah, the weapons are a bit disappointing. Audibly, this game is alright. While I don't find any of the particular songs in this game terribly memorable, they do work for what they need to do. They are high energy, and comparatively to a few other Namco arcade ports I've played, this one definitely sounds like it's on the higher end. Now if you want to get a copy of Burning Force, it's not terribly common, and it's not the most inexpensive. My copy cost about $10, but I think I might have gotten lucky with this one, because a lot of the copies I'm seeing are $30, $40, and at that price, honestly, I can't really recommend it, because you can get so many better polished games for a lot less on the Genesis. But Burning Force isn't necessarily a bad game, especially if you do like games like Space Harrier. And honestly, while this game does initially appear to be nothing more than a Space Harrier clone, It does have its own unique personality, and that's definitely something worth considering if you're interested in those kinds of games. It's not just another Space Harrier. It's another Space Harrier where you're stuck primarily on the ground and turn your jet bike into a plane sometimes. And that's gotta count for something. But in the end, after playing this game, I can say with full confidence that there's one thing I took away from playing it. And that is, if you feel a burning force, you should probably go to the doctor.